That metal event was filmed more quickly than Gary Chiron's Van Halen tenure.
How do heavy metal fans differ from regular people? Asked Don Jameson, co-host of That Metal Show, once.
They're cooler and they have a higher percentage of mullets.
For 8 years, That Metal Show was the loudest show on television, a lone beacon in the cable wilderness where rock gods weren't just respected, they were worshipped. For millions of metal fans, it was the only place on TV where they could find a voice, a community, and a home. There were 125 episodes in 14 seasons, and it was a true cultural phenomenon. Then, on January 19, 2016, everything fell silent.
The network that created it, VH1, abruptly ended the program, leaving the hosts and hordes of loyal viewers perplexed.
This is the tale of how 3 men who were merely discussing their favorite bands ignited a movement and the reason why the organization they established was abruptly removed from the public consciousness.
This is That Metal Show's ascent and demise.
A channel that was essentially devoted to the ghosts of music TV's past, VH1 Classic, took a risk on something completely different back on November 15, 2008. They started a show with a seemingly straightforward concept. Bring together 3 ardent music lovers to discuss hard rock and heavy metal during a period when his parent networks, MTV and VH1, had abandoned music videos in favor of reality series about celebrity rehab and juvenile gangs.
I felt like I was rebelling during That Metal Show.
In its own press release, it was characterized as The View Meets Headbangers Ball, a weekly forum for discussion, debate, and celebration of all things rock. The show was praised in other interviews as a hybrid of The View and The Greatest Dang Sports Show. The hosts were the true force behind the show.
They were sincere. Eddie was in the middle.
One of the guys I've hung out with is Trunk, a seasoned music journalist and radio personality with an absolutely unbelievable amount of knowledge about the genre. Jim Florentine, a former romantic interest of Robin Quivers, and comedian and longtime buddy Don Jameson flanked him,
whose fanboy viewpoint and sharp humor provided the ideal counterpoint to Trunk's knowledgeable authority. It's great to have a show and actually get paid to talk about it.
When I've been talking to drunks in bars for years about Black Sabbath and who's a better singer, AZ or Dio, now I can get paid for it, Florentine told the Great Falls Tribune in 2008.
Basically, it's a half hour.
We sit around and crack jokes and have guests on to just mess around with them and get them involved in whatever bits we're doing. While the opinion is frequently mentioned in interviews to describe the show, Florentine was quick to clarify that, in contrast to the women on the show, the arguments aren't personal and the chemistry wasn't faked for the cameras. I know everyone in that band Trunk and VH1 was the one who really showed interest in making it happen. At that point, Trunk brought in Florentine and Jameson, telling the network that the show could only work with those 2 guys sitting besides him. The first season attracted high-profile guests like Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee from Rush, as well as J.J. French and Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. This authenticity was the driving force behind the show, which was a program created by fans for the fans, and that one difference is what really made it a hit. Speaking of the format, it was straightforward but brilliant. Each episode featured interviews with rock royalty, but it was the recurring segments that became the show's heartbeat and created a real buzz. Florentine was quick to point out that because they were on VH1 Classic, the idea was to focus on bands that predated the 90s, adding nothing new, nothing about Lamborn. I'd love to because I love those bands, but it really doesn't fit the format.
Even former New York Mets catcher Mike Piazza, who identified as a metal fan, appeared on the show.
These segments weren't just filler, they were an open invitation to everyone watching to play along as well, to argue, and to feel like they were sitting right in the middle of the action. For example, there was the Throwdown, where the hosts would engage in heated arguments over classic rock arguments like the never-ending war between Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, the Metal Show Top 5, where the host and guests would rank everything from guitar solos to albums to terrible cover art, and, of course, Stump the Trunk, the renowned trivia segment where audience members tried to dig up rock history questions so obscure that the walking encyclopedia himself, Eddie Trunk, would be completely stumped. We're outside Madison Square Garden and we're going to have a little fun with the fans out here. We got our Van Halen TV mic cubes and these fake earpieces. We're going to tell our fans that we're going to be talking to Van Halen backstage live asking them questions and we're just going to mess with them. We're not talking to them. We can't even get into the concert because VH1 is too busy. Now, one of my favorite parts was the pranks they play on people. Cheap. Okay, so we're here with what's your name, buddy? Joe. Joe, we have Van Halen TV here. You have a question you want to ask the band? They have the ability to see us live backstage. Why wasn't the bass player as good? Dave wants to know if you'll be flashing tonight during a show. Wolfgang, the new bass player, is the son of Aya, and he wants to know what your problem is. There isn't any issue because I enjoy seeing the original band, he said. I've never seen him play, so I'm not sure, Dave said. What's Paul Stanley doing here? We're with a Parisian here. No, don't say that. Wolfgang just stormed out of the room. Yeah. Put this on the end. Wait, I didn't mean to like that, guys. Eddie said he wants to bring out some security guy or something like that to talk to you. For what? Dave wants to know how long you've been cutting lawns. That's why Eddie stormed out of the room. I'm glad he's back with the band. He just stormed out of the room. H from Paris. Where's that? Oh, I thought that was a town in Jersey. Paramus, did you say Dave said he feels bad? He asked him a quick question because they're out. And now that they're all gone, the question that kept coming up during the press for the show was why the bands or artists who were on it didn't perform live on the show? But that's not what I wanted to do with the show, he said, adding that paying for the performance rights may be a significant budget buster. It's more about enjoying yourself. That metal show became a cultural phenomenon almost immediately, and for a large underprivileged audience, it was the only mainstream television platform where their heroes were treated with genuine respect and excitement. The show became a must-see for any rock musician with something to promote, and the guest list was insane. It was a true who's who of the entire genre, with Kirk Hammett of Metallica appearing one week. Axl Rose, who hadn't done a TV interview in years, and Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm, who represented a new generation sitting next to Kerry King from Slayer, were two examples of how the show created moments that couldn't be found anywhere else. However, the show wasn't just about legends, it was also about bridging generations, as evidenced by the younger artists' eyes, who couldn't believe they were performing with their idols. It was also a place for validation, and when Steven Adler of Guns N' Roses was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012, he wore that metal show shirt to the ceremony, a public thank you to the platform that had welcomed him back. The show also provided a much-needed voice to musicians who had been marginalized by changing musical trends, demonstrating that there was still a sizable, devoted, and passionate audience for hard rock and heavy metal. However, some musicians weren't exactly grateful for the show or declined to be on it, including Ozzy Osbourne. Eddie Trunk said, "My phones are down. You kind of hit on it already tonight. Is when will you have Ozzy on that mental show? I mean, you mentioned that you never really don't know the woman, but she won't. Well, she won't let him do it. Why, though? I mean, he would do it and he watches the show, and I know for a fact that he does, but she won't let him do it. I mean, it's kind of because of whatever problem she has. Is it her pride? It's control. It's ego. You know, we have people on our show like Jakey Lee. And, people who I've had people on my radio shows and talked about all these people who basically told stories about how she ripped them off, and she avoids that. You have to realize that this is a woman who has, in a number of ways, positioned herself as this media darling talk show host and this amazing person, but behind the scenes, she was a brutal, notorious rock manager for decades and, to some extent, still is. She is very controlling and it has to be her way, and she doesn't want a difficult question. And she is this whole new persona now, so she doesn't want any of that stuff brought up. She wants to be the lovely, fabulous Miss Sharon O. The other famous holdout was Paul Stanley from Kiss. Eddie Trunk has publicly stated that Kiss, especially Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, are sensitive to criticism and that any negative comments about the band tend to result in them not granting interviews. That knows the stories about who has been in the band and who hasn't been in the band, who was paid, who was robbed of songwriting publishing, and stuff like that. The world would have to end before Paul Stanley would ever agree to come on a show and be interviewed, Trunk stated on the radio. Eddie Trunk, the host of that metal show, has been a huge fan of Yeah.
Will you ever appear on the show? Will you ever go there? Come on, Paul. What's going on?
Honestly, that's, I guess, an acquired taste for some.
And to me, it's Wayne's World. Even Paul Stanley was asked directly about appearing on that metal show.
The show continued to grow for 14 seasons, moving from a small studio in New York to a larger soundstage in Los Angeles to be closer to the rock stars who lived there, and its runtime expanded from 30 minutes to an hour. By all measures, it was a huge success and a flagship show for the network, but just as it was reaching its zenith, the ground beneath it began to shake. The world of cable TV was changing, and the very network that Metal Show called home was about to undergo a massive identity change.